The year is 2007, and you take your first steps as Desmond Miles, stepping into the Animus, and you come out on the other side as Altair, snaking through the Holy Land and taking down Templars left and right. That was a magical time. Assassin's Creed was the first game of its kind and groundbreaking in almost every conceivable way. Jump to 16 years later, and we've seen 12 mainline Assassin's Creed games and even more spin-offs. Now, if you spend over 15 years making about 30 games in the same franchise, you'd have to ask yourself, what the fuck am I doing? Well, Assassin's Creed Mirage seems to be Ubisoft's reflection on that very question, and a return to its roots after taking a major departure in 2017 with a trilogy of mega open-world action RPGs. But before we get to how that worked out, let me set the stage a little bit. For this video, I played through the entire story of Assassin's Creed Mirage and then did some side stuff, which took me about 17-18 hours in total. Then I went back to play Assassin's Creed 1 for a few hours and also some Assassin's Creed Valhalla to get some footage for comparison. And with that out of the way, let's talk about Assassin's Creed Mirage, starting with everything that the game gets right. First and foremost, Assassin's Creed Mirage has the least amount of fluff I've ever seen in an Assassin's Creed game. For instance, Mirage has 21 viewpoints scattered around the city. To put that in perspective, Assassin's Creed 1 had 91 viewpoints. With the game's 15 to 20 hour playtime, this comes as a much needed respite from the 50, 100, 200 hour long games that we've been overwhelmed with this year. It's a much linear and focused story where you play as a full-fledged assassin or a hidden one. And it's also which means no more fighting literal gods or riding a big-ass wolf or any of that fantasy nonsense. I mean, there's still one assassination ability that lets you take down 5 people in one go, but that's actually pretty cool. One of the biggest complaints about the new trilogy was that they don't really play like an Assassin's Creed game, and rightfully so. Maybe it was lost in communication, but these games were more or less you playing as an outsider who gets roped into the hidden ones because of common goals. So most of the story takes place outside of the Creed, and the AC part just becomes a side quest. Well, not in Mirage. It's an Assassin's Creed game through and through, with nothing to distract you from your assassin fantasies. And that's just one way the game goes back to its roots. As a throwback to the original game, you can also see the return of bureaus and investigations, along with some very familiar looking hiding spots. Also, you can't just climb anywhere your heart desires. Much like the original games, Mirage only allows for specific climbable spots. Progression and combat take a different direction from the new trilogy as well, with the total removal of leveling. Instead, skill points are gained by completing missions and assassinations. And while the enemies still retain visible health bars, there is absolutely no level gating at all. Regardless of how many skill points you have, at most you need 2 parries to take an enemy down. Normal attacks do the same amount of damage throughout, though you do have to switch tactics a bit while fighting heavy enemies. Visually speaking, it's not a huge upgrade from Valhalla, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because Valhalla was a gorgeous game too. The sandy structures of Baghdad are beautifully contrasted with bright colors in vegetation, domes, clothing, and wildlife. And with the fan service for the original game, you can kinda say, this is what Assassin's Creed 1 would look like if it were made in Valhalla's engine. Last but not the least is performance. I played on the PS5 in performance mode and got a consistent 60 FPS throughout the game. No random dynamic resolution drops or blurry upscaling issues at all. There are maybe 2 locations where the frame rate dips below 60, but it doesn't last long. The game obviously looks much sharper in quality mode, but in my opinion, the 30 FPS isn't worth there. Combine all of this with a $50 price tag in a time where every AAA game is moving to $70, and it becomes easy to make a case for recommending Mirage. That is why the next part is going to be a little rough. Remember when I said Mirage looks like Assassin's Creed 1 made in Valhalla's engine? Well, it also means that it suffers from similar gameplay issues. Parkour is still janky and disappointing and works pretty much like Valhalla. Honestly, I cannot understand why parkour in each new game feels like a downgrade. It's not like Ubisoft doesn't know how to make better parkour because they've done it before. And even though combat follows the same logic as older AC titles, it seems to have the same mechanicalness or mechanicality as Valhalla, especially if you play Valhalla with a dagger and sword. In a way, this makes Valhalla's combat better because you had different weapon choices offering more variety. In Mirage, you have a bunch of swords and daggers, each with their specific abilities. And on paper, that gives you a whole range of combinations, which should be good. Sadly, when it comes to the actual gameplay, they work pretty much the same, so there's no real incentive to switch. Sure, one of them slows down time on a perfect parry and another one gives a damage boost. But you can go through the whole game from start to finish with just the starting gear and no upgrades and it wouldn't feel any different. The only sword that actually makes a difference is the one that doubles your damage but reduces your HP to half as long as you have it equipped. Now, the good thing about this whole ordeal is that you're an assassin who works in the shadows. There are various tools you can use to stealth your way around enemies. You can put them to sleep, distract them with noise, or pay different factions to keep them busy while you do the sneaky sneaks. But the bad thing about it is that stealth also functions pretty much the same way as Valhalla, so that gets old pretty quick as well. And even when you're running away from the guards at the highest wanted level, it is so easy to get away or even just get rid of them that it ends up taking away some of the thrill. As far as the story goes, without spoiling anything, it's pretty good as long as you're going after the order, and there's a major plot twist at the end that jumps at you out of nowhere unless you've been paying attention. But I'll be honest, the ending, the ultimate payoff, didn't have a lot of appeal for me. Maybe it was the short length of the game or the lack of a modern day segment, but I felt that it was a little lacking. Which brings me to the next bit. If you've played Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you know that towards a very twisted end, Basim makes his way out of the simulation into the modern day story. Effectively, the game ends with a major cliffhanger. Later on in the DLC, we see him meet William Miles, which sets the stage for Mirage. So naturally, it would make you want to know what happens next, right? Sadly, Mirage doesn't have a modern day segment, so we'll have to wait and find out. We know that Mirage takes place over 800 years after the events of Origins and a few years before Valhalla, but that's about it. Mirage starts out with William Miles introducing the story, so ultimately not having any clue about what's happening with Basim in the modern day timeline is a bit of a letdown. While the lack of modern day storyline makes it incredibly easy for newcomers to enjoy the game without any knowledge about the rest of the franchise, people who are familiar with Assassin's Creed and the modern day timeline might be a little disappointed. Also, I know I put the visuals as a positive, but I would like to point out that it's a beautiful game by the same standards as Valhalla, which released in 2020. At this point, I think we should see a noticeable bump in graphics, especially since it's a much smaller game in both size and scope. And then there's another issue. On one hand, the focused nature of the story allows for better progression and less boredom, but on the other hand, the similar visuals and gameplay issues also make it look like a cut-down version of Valhalla. If Mirage had released after Odyssey, it would have been absolutely amazing and I wouldn't have any issues at all. But with Valhalla, Ubisoft somehow managed to improve a lot of the open world issues that plagued both Origins and Odyssey, especially with discovery, exploration, and even with different storylines. Taking all of that into consideration, Assassin's Creed Mirage feels like a weird combination of the old and the new Assassin's Creed that's neither here nor there. This is why I went with that title for the video. If I think of Mirage as a reboot, I can see that it's a step in the right direction, but there's so much history and baggage that comes along with it that it's gonna take some more time to figure out the sweet spot. In my opinion, instead of making half-assed remasters, what Ubisoft should do is remake one of the older titles from the ground up and figure out what made them click with the audience. But then again, that's just wishful thinking. Looking at it in isolation, it's an easy 8 out of 10. It respects your time and doesn't overstay its welcome, it looks good and has a decent story, and it offers consistently solid performance throughout the game. But the burden of the franchise it carries drags it down a little, and for me it's a 7 out of 10. So here's what I suggest. If you've been a die-hard fan of Assassin's Creed all this time, it's worth checking out just to see the direction that the franchise is taking. However, if you've been falling in and out like me over the years, don't be in a rush. Just wait. There's so many games coming out this year that you're not really missing out by not playing this right now. Trust me on that.